Mr. Speaker, before I begin, can I just take note of the remarks made by the honourable member opposite? I think while we wait to see the terms of reference, and the devil, as always, is in the details, and it appears that the government is, at this moment, working those out. That is, it appears to be improvising. We note with interest and with approval the nomination of a man who commands the respect of every member of this House, Justice Iacobucci. We hope that he will be given the terms of reference necessary to do the job, to re-establish the just authority of the House of Commons referred to by my honourable colleague, and that we will get to the bottom of an affair in which the government's behaviour has displayed no credit at all. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister gave Her Excellency, the Governor-General, some 6,000 words, but I can assure you that I will be briefer today.
Throne speech and budget that make up in length what it lacks in vision. Rien dans ce budget.
Nothing in this budget or in the throne speech can justify the Prime Minister's decision to shut down Parliament for 6 weeks. Nothing. But Canadians will not be fooled. The Prime Minister placed a bet on Canadians' disillusionment, and he lost his bet. Because for Canadians, the reasons for proroguing were apparent and clear at the outset. The Prime Minister shut down Parliament so that he could avoid hearing questions on the Afghan detainee scandal. The Prime Minister has acknowledged that he is in an untenable position.
Parliament to skirt blame for a year of willful blindness when the Conservatives had credible reports of torture in Afghan jails but did nothing. We've called on the government to hold a full, independent public inquiry into the detainee issue with a mandate to examine the whole length of the mission in Afghanistan. And we'll examine the terms of this proposed inquiry by Justice Iacobucci with interest to see whether it even begins to approximate what is necessary to get to the bottom of this sorry affair. But the Conservatives had refused up to this moment, and then they shut down Parliament. Et c'était plus qu'une opération de...
And it was more than an operation in camouflage. It was an attack on our democracy. This Parliament, as you know full well, Mr. Speaker, is not the House of the Prime Minister. Parliament is the People's House. By shutting down Parliament, the Prime Minister threw Canadians out of its own house. Canadians did not appreciate that. They know that all Prime Ministers are accountable to Parliament and not the opposite. We presented concrete reforms to limit the power to prorogue Parliament.
We asked for unanimous consent to establish a special committee to reform prorogation and prevent future abuse. That motion, it was a modest first step seeking common ground, was shouted down by Conservative members opposite. Shame on them. The issue here is credibility. Canadians expect it. The government lacks it. No credibility on detainees. No credibility on prorogation. No credibility on its own agenda. The throne speech and the budget let Canadians down. They expected vision, and they got gimmicks. They deserved ambition. They got drift. This is a tired government falling back on its laissez-faire instincts. It's left Canadians to fend for itself. Take pensions. Take pensions, an important issue. This budget has nothing to offer Canadians on the pensions crisis. Canada is already in a pensions crisis, Mr. Speaker, and it's not just a matter of catastrophic bankruptcies like Nortel. Un tiers des Canadiens.
1/3 of all Canadians do not have adequate retirement savings to maintain their standard of living once they stop working. Another third of Canadians do not have any retirement savings and will depend entirely on what they receive from the government. So too many Canadians have too little in savings to retire with dignity. And all too often, the savings held by those people who've been successful in putting money aside are not secure. And last year showed that clearly.
This party put forward specific proposals to improve retirement security for middle-class families. We called for a supplementary CPP, for the use of the CPP as a pension fund manager of last resort, and for changes to the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act to protect the most vulnerable pensioners. We called for action. Canadians expected action. And what did the Conservatives deliver? They delivered us Seniors' Day. Well, Mr. Speaker, Seniors' Day is not going to be much fun, and it's not going to have much point if seniors can't afford to take the day off.
Exactly.
It's the same, it's not this side of the House that mocks seniors. It's the other side of the House that's done nothing for them.
Insult seniors.
The same gimmickry is in play in their treatment of veterans. À la fin du mois de janvier.
At the end of January, we organized a roundtable on veterans. We heard troubling accounts of the difficulties they're facing in obtaining care or assistance to overcome a handicap.
Veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder will attempt suicide. This is a troubling, deeply disturbing statistic, and these great Canadians need our help. But what do the Conservatives offer? Community memorials and Vimy Ridge Day. I'm a firm proponent of Vimy Ridge Day, but it's no substitute for concrete help for our veterans. Our families, our seniors, our veterans can't live on symbols and gimmicks. Il y a 5 semaines.
5 weeks ago, the Liberal Party put forth 3 specific proposals to create jobs and promote innovation and entrepreneurship. We invited the government to provide funding to facilitate the capital cost allowance deductions. A measure such as that would have helped manufacturers to modernize their businesses, to create jobs, and to improve their productivity. We proposed financial incentives that would be temporary to facilitate the hiring of young workers. And we called for additional tax incentives to provide better support for our entrepreneurs and innovators in emerging sectors like clean energy and life science.
Instead of measures to create jobs, this budget has only freezes, cuts, and gimmicks. The Conservatives are also cutting $4.5 billion in planned foreign aid right when our focus in Afghanistan is shifting from military to humanitarian engagement. The government is making superficial tax changes to the universal child benefit, but they're changes that will not help low-income families or single parents get the child care they need. The Conservatives are ignoring the major issues that matter to Canadians. Pensions, nothing. Health care, nothing. Les changements climatiques, rien.
Climate change, nothing. Culture, nothing.
The Conservatives also will try to claim they're not raising taxes, and everyone in this House knows that's false. Yeah. The Conservatives are raising payroll taxes by $13 billion, a tax hike that will kill more than 200,000 jobs and hurt small businesses when they need help the most. This government talks a fine game about innovation, but they're not credible. They're not credible when they cut $148 million from the research councils last year, let $160 million in approved spending for the Canada Space Agency lapse, shut down the National Science Advisor, and walk away from 50 years of Canadian leadership in nuclear medicine. Les investissements, recherche et développement.
Investments in research and development as a percentage of GDP have decreased constantly since this government took power. We have taken a step backwards in terms of productivity, internet connectivity, and innovation. And a considerable number of members of government continue to question scientific proof on climate change. How can we believe this government when they talk about creating the jobs of tomorrow? Last fall, it slashed the eco-energy program, the best Canadian program to stimulate renewable energy. The Conservatives are not credible on job creation because they are not credible as regards clean energy. Clean energy is the investment we need for our future, for the young people in our country. The Conservatives are spending, but they're not investing.
Spent more than $56 billion into the hole. But what did Canadians get? What's the return on investment? If you start counting back in October 2008, back when the Prime Minister was saying there wouldn't be a recession in Canada, you'll find that more than 300,000 Canadians have lost their jobs, and they're still out of work. Job creation is down. Productivity is down. Youth employment is double the national average. And even the jobs the Conservatives promise in this budget won't make up for the ones we've lost. It didn't have to be this way. Where were the landmark investments in clean energy? Where were the investments in green infrastructure that would create jobs for our kids? Canada missed those opportunities because this government chose to ignore them. The Prime Minister's spending came without a vision. It came with a whole lot of zeros, and this budget doesn't make up the difference. This government, above all, is not credible on getting their record deficit under control. Let's roll the tape back and remember the real story. They make a claim to fiscal competence which is entirely undeserved. They inherited a $13 billion surplus from this side of the House. And what did they do with it? They spent at record levels through 2006, 2007, and 2008, and they were on the edge of deficit before the recession started. Then they said there'd be no recession. Then they said there'd be no deficit. And then suddenly, hey presto, the deficit was at $32 billion. And then at 50, and then at $56 billion. You can't run a country if you can't count. Mais ce sont pas seulement les chiffres.
But it's not only the numbers that are a problem. Above all, it's the inexistence of a coherent plan to take control of public finances.
Spending beginning in 2011, but that's it. They won't tell you which programs they'll cut, which services Canadians will lose, and where the Conservatives will find the necessary savings. That isn't a plan, it's an empty promise. The Conservatives say they're going to freeze our salaries. Fine, okay. You can freeze my salary, Mr. Speaker, but it's not a plan for deficit reduction. It's a gimmick. If the Prime Minister were serious about leading by example, he'd start by cutting the hundreds of millions of taxpayers' dollars he's wasting on partisan advertising in Poland.
Here, here, here.
He'd cut management consultants instead of scything through the hard-working public service of the country. He'd cut the size of cabinet. He'd ban those 10%er mailings outside of MPs' own ridings, as we've called for. And he'd stop increasing spending in the Prime Minister's own department. Les familles canadiennes.
Canadian families are saving where they can, and the government should do the same thing. And this is where we see the heart of the problem, because this government does not listen to Canadian families. Reading polls is not listening to citizens. Dividing Canadians to have some partisan benefit is not listening to Canadians. I spent the first weeks of this year on the road visiting universities and colleges. I listened to young people about their concerns and hopes, and they talked about their fears of unemployment and of how necessary it is to protect the environment and fight climate change. I listened to a generation of young Canadians who are ready to take a stand but are not given the opportunity to do so.
The Conservatives said they were consulting with Canadians. Who did the Prime Minister consult? When was the last time he actually took unscripted, uncontrolled questions from any Canadian at all. That's what listening is, Mr. Speaker, and you can't lead if you won't listen, and this Prime Minister does not listen. When I listen, this is what I hear. Middle-class families are worried about looking after their parents when they retire. They're worried about getting their kids through school and about the jobs that will be waiting for them at the other end.
Canadian families want to know that their government is in touch with the challenges of tomorrow and that it has a real plan to make Canada a success. This budget fails when it comes to credibility, vision, and ambition. We cannot support this budget.
Test of Canada's potential. We cannot support it. We will vote against the budget motion now before us, but we, unlike other parties in this House, will do so responsibly. We will not cause an election. Canadians don't want an election. What they're looking for is an alternative, and we will provide them that alternative. The Liberal Party is taking part in the most open, most transparent, most inclusive, and most comprehensive process of public policy renewal for any Canadian party in the history of this country, and one that will continue through the conference in Montreal later this month. We're engaging Canadians in a national conversation about the Canada we want and they want in 2017, the 150th anniversary of our federation, and I invite all members to join us in that dialogue. The alternatives in the Canadian political system are becoming clearer by the hour. The alternative the Conservatives offer the country is now very clear. Year after year after year of austerity, cuts, freezes, and the message they're sending Canadians is equally clear. You're on your own, Canadians. Your government will not help you. Our vision is clear. Using a positive, fiscally responsible vision of government to make Canada the best educated, the healthiest, the greenest, and the most international society on earth. Those are goals worthy of a great people. Those are goals we can achieve. We've done it before. I stand on a side of the House proud of the traditions that our party has represented since Wilfrid Laurier. We've done it before. We'll do it again. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments, questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Caribou, Prince George.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And listening to the Leader of the Opposition comments, I'm just astonished at the hypocrisy that the Liberal Party is showing. Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition can be forgiven a little bit because he spent more than 30 years outside of Canada. So perhaps he doesn't know. Perhaps he doesn't know the legacy of the 13 years of Liberal government, majority government, I might add, when they had a chance. They had a chance to do most every one of those things that the Leader of the Opposition just said that we should be doing. They had 13 years to do it. What did they do, Mr. Speaker? Nothing. They did none of these things. They did nothing to return the security of seniors. They did nothing to expand the CPP. Mr. Speaker, this government has put the largest investment in infrastructure in this country in the history of any government. We have made the largest investment in young people learning, getting an education, getting job training, young people at risk, helping them get skills to get jobs in the history of this country. We have made the largest tax reductions to working Canadians all across this country in the history of any government in this country. We have taken more people off the tax rolls in the history of any government in this country. What are they talking about? It's too bad he was away so long, Mr. Speaker. Maybe he would know a little bit about this.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Order.
Is that the best they got?
Mr. Speaker, as someone behind me was saying, is that the best they've got?
Apparently.
I was amused by his account of my biography. He wants to make me apologize for my biography. Perhaps he should ask Michael Fox, Wayne Gretzky, or Sidney Crosby to apologize for their biography, Mr. Speaker. I'm proud of my biography, as those distinguished people are proud of my biography. The minute we start to question whether someone's a Canadian because he lives overseas, our country's in big trouble, Mr. Speaker.
Shame.
And as for the record of the previous Liberal government, on the issue that I raised at the beginning of my speech, pensions, just think about what this government, the former government, did on pensions. Facing a very serious structural crisis in the future of Canada's pension plan, the previous Liberal government stood up and did what this government has not done, which is face the future, reinvest, recreate, put the pensions of Canadians on a sound footing for the next generation. That's the kind of leadership we expected from this government. That's the kind of leadership we did not get.
Order, please.
L'honorable député.
The honourable member for Argenteuil-Papineau-Mirabel. Mr. Speaker, the opposition leader's speech, you know that there was a wide-ranging consultation in Quebec, and you said you consulted Canada-wide. There's a real crisis in the manufacturing sector, and it was given very little, whereas billions was given to the auto sector. And Quebec taxpayers' money is being used to develop the nuclear option, which will be able to compete unfairly with electricity. I read the columnist Jean Lapierre, who said that the Liberal leader, is going to act as did the former leader of the Liberal Party. He's going to sit on his hands. So I would like that the Liberal leader convince me of why he's against the budget, but and yet he's going to remain seated and allow this budget to be passed. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. I'd like to thank my honourable colleague for his question. I like his remarks rather less. He's talking about fear. But what I'm doing is I'm keeping in mind a vision for the country. He wants Quebec not to be at the center of Canada, as was the case with Quebec athletes in the Olympics. We want a Canada that is inclusive and optimistic, with Quebecers at the very heart of Team Canada. That's the Canada of which I am proud. And that is the Canada I want to promote. He asked questions about our opposition. I think I was more than clear that his political party does not have the same responsibilities as mine does. They have a permanent position that they can keep because they'll never form government. But we were in government, and we will be in government. So we must take our responsibilities seriously. We must be able to offer an alternative that is inclusive and which has Quebec at the very center of our vision of a renewed Canada. And that is what I am working at, to build an alternative which will help Quebecers and bring them from supporting a party that offers them nothing. We want to offer them a vision of a Quebec that can be at the center of the country And we firmly believe these Quebecers will come to us. Thank you.
Order. Questions and comments? The honourable member for Western Arctic.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague, the leader of the Liberal Party, for his rendition on the budget. He said there's two distinct visions coming now in this Parliament, and I just like that suggests to me that he may be changing the fiscal policy of the Liberal Party as well. When we see what the Conservatives are doing with continuing the corporate tax breaks, continuing the change in the basic revenue-generating capacity of this government onto the people, moving it away from the corporations, the banks, the people that exploit our natural resources at great profit. Does this mean his vision of the fiscal development of this country is somehow different than the Conservatives? That on the largest item within this budget, the greatest difference is no difference at all between these two parties. Is that not correct?
The honourable leader of the opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I think the differences are very clear. I thank the honourable member for his question. We are faced now, it seems to me, with an increasingly clear alternative. A Conservative government which offers us and offers Canadians nothing but years of austerity, years of repentance for their own errors. I mean, who got this country into this mess?
They did.
We've seen this movie before. The previous so-called progressive Conservatives dropped us into a $42 billion deficit.
Exactly.
This government has dropped us into an even deeper hole of $56 billion. They've done so before the recession began, with imprudent spending that left us no reserve when the rains came. And the rains came. They didn't expect the rains would come. They didn't predict the rains would come. They didn't know the weather was going to change. And then the rains came and they weren't prepared. And we are now in a $56 billion hole, which the investment didn't even make us more productive, more competitive. It did not create employment. And we are where we are. The other party does not have the responsibilities that we have. They don't have the experience of government that we have. They've never run a government at a federal level. We have cleaned up the deficit left behind by the Mulroney failure. We will clean up the deficit left behind by the Harper failure. Our vision and we will do this. And we will class. I need lessons in class from the other side of the house.
I don't think so.
It'd be the Harper Cannon.
The choices before this country are clear. They are the choices between a party which has had the responsibility of government, a party on the other side, two other parties on the other side that have had no responsibility of government at the federal level, and a Conservative party which offers us a dark and endless downward spiral into austerity, cuts, freezes, and gimmicks.